Welcome. Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please check out our other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence the community and the world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit us at oaktreechurch.com. There you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process that we call The Path. Now enjoy this message. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or the website contact form. Thank you.
Well, our theme this year is an intense examination of our spiritual growth process, right? We are working through the path about spiritual maturity, and we are doing it very, very slowly. A lot of times we hit the path quickly, just sort of high level, maybe we'll dig into one part or something. We're taking this whole year to focus on our spiritual growth, our spiritual development, intense, personal spiritual growth. Don't forget that this is a personal thing, okay? This is not something that anyone can do for anyone else. We can help each other, but if we are not committed to spiritual growth, it's not going to happen. It's just not, okay? And in 2 Peter chapter 1, Peter says, make every effort to add to your faith. And then he lists these qualities that we call the path. And so we're spending all year working on that. And it's the theme itself is based off of one of two Bible verses that our name comes from, actually. And one of those is in the first Psalm, verse 3. But I'd like to show you verses 1 through 3, just as we're setting up this new season, this new series. In verses 1 through 3 of Psalm 1, I know the slide says Hebrews. We'll get there eventually, okay? I haven't gotten lost. Okay, I'm not off the path. We are still, we're still right on track. We're just making a new turn here, so we're seeing the sights as we make the turn. Okay, in the first Psalm, Psalm 1, the first three verses actually give us a really neat description of the righteous person, the godly person, someone who's living out godliness. And the way the writer, probably David, does this is verse 1 is about what not to do, verse 2 is what to do, and verse 3 is what happens when we do it. Pretty cool outline, right? So next time you have to give a devotional or something, you want to share something with someone, there it is. It's just outlined right there for you. Okay, verse 1, how blessed is the one who does not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the assembly of the scoffers. If you want to be a godly person, the first thing is don't hang out with people who are going to take you away from God. Don't hang out with people who are going to lead you away from the truth, okay? And if we're paralleling the path, that takes intention, that takes, in fact, I might use the word, dedication, right? This is where faith and excellence come in right at the beginning. There needs to be a commitment at the beginning. I want to grow, which means that I probably need to think about some changes in my life. Verse 2, what should we do instead? Instead, he finds pleasure in obeying the Lord's commands. He meditates on his commands day and night. What does that sound like? Knowledge and self-control, right? Studying the Bible, reading the Bible, meditating on the Bible, and then obeying what we have learned. That's knowledge and self-control, all summarized in one verse there. All right, so what's the result then? Verse 3, and this is one of the verses we get our church name. He is like a tree planted by flowing streams. It yields its fruit at the proper time. Its leaves never fall off, and he succeeds in everything he attempts. Instead of withering, instead of falling prey to the harsh realities of life, the godly person, the righteous person, because of knowledge and self-control, is able to experience perseverance. be able to persevere through the tough times, and actually succeed in godliness, succeed in spiritual growth. And so we find perseverance and godliness. Pretty neat that 6 out of our 8 steps are sort of summarized there in the first 3 verses of Psalm 1, right? There's the thing where if you are looking for something, you can find it anywhere, even if it's not there, right? I don't want to be accused to say, well, you just find the path everywhere. I think it's in a lot of places, right? I'm not trying to put the path into place. I'm saying that if this is truly from God, it should be found all over the scriptures, right? Even in the least likely places. And as I'm thinking through the first Psalm, preparing for Hebrews, and I know we'll make the connection. As I'm thinking through the first Psalm, I'm like, how is this not the path? How is this not like exactly what Peter told us, so much later in the Bible? That last verse in verse 3 makes it sound like everything's going to be fine, right? It yields its fruit at the proper time. That's where seasons come in. That's where we're focusing. Its leaves never fall off. He succeeds in everything he attempts. That's because once you become a Christian, everything changes to the point where there's no more trouble, right? No more problems. You have no more bad experiences. No one talks badly about you. Satan can't get you. Everything is just perfect from the time you say, I do, right? Right. That's no one's experience ever, right? Of course there's going to be trouble. Of course there's going to be difficulty. But what this allows us to do is learn how to live and grow through it, right? Not let it beat us down. And in fact, the book of Hebrews, and when we fast forward all the way to chapter 12, we read that Jesus was able to suffer the cross because of the joy set before him, right? He knew that the cross was not the end. He knew that the cross was a step in the right direction. It was an important step in the right direction. And so he suffered terrible, terrible things because that's not the end of the line, right? Because of the joy that is set before him. And so that's what we're doing in this right now. So we're using the concept of seasons, and we've been talking about this, for 5 months now. This is not new. I keep coming back to it. All of our teachers keep coming back to this idea of seasons, right? And our spiritual growth will go through seasons. And what we've found is that the seasons seem to parallel the steps of the path very nicely. Again, not trying to force anything. It just seems like it works really nicely that way. And this week, we transition from spring into summer. Woo! Okay. Now, I know it's not meteorological summer yet. It was still 44 degrees when I drove in here this morning. Okay, so what my goal is, there's some people who believe in the power of words and everything. I think if we just speak summer into existence, then maybe it'll warm up and it'll happen, right? All right, so it's not there yet, but it's coming. It's right around the corner. I'm happy for that. Really looking forward to summer. We've spent a couple of months now in spring, like literally, physically, and in our series, right? Focusing on the nutrition and the development of our root system so that we can have strong roots, right? If you're planting your gardens already or whatever, you know how important the root system is, right? Without roots, it just falls down. It doesn't grow. One of Jesus' parables, the plant sprung up very quickly and then died very quickly because there was no deep root. Right? The roots are so important, and those are developed in the spring, okay? Now, think about this. If spring did its job, consider summer for a little bit. If spring did its job, then we have a strong root system, and our crop should be blooming nicely by now, right? Maybe you have some flowers. Maybe you have some little buds on there. Your leaves are green. Things are starting to actually look nice. Now, we cheated this year, and Sarah Lynn planted full-grown flowers. And our neighbor came over and said, "Oh, it's looking so good out there." I'm like, "Yeah, Sarah Lynn's doing a good job." It's just lots of color and everything. We didn't wait for them to grow. We just went ahead and planted them already flowered. So a little bit cheating. But the rest of them are starting to come along nicely. There's still a lot of green, because spring did its job, right? We have the spring, we have the rains, and we have everything else that bring that to that. So we have some blooming, we have some summer crops, maybe even some early fruit, some of that. Now, here's the problem that some of you don't like about summer. It gets hot. It gets really hot. Now, I like that, okay? And I know not everybody does. That's fine, okay? I like it when it's really, really, really hot. The problem is, and I will admit this will be the only time in the entirety of the universe existence you will hear me say there's a problem with summer, okay? The problem with summer is that it can get so hot, and especially if it doesn't rain, right, that it can dry out, it can kill these plants. Right? That's why we have to be diligent. We have to make sure to continue to water them and tend them, pull the weeds, do all the things. They still need work. This is not just, hey, plant it and forget it. And spiritual growth isn't that way either. It takes work. It takes attention. It takes cultivation. And what happens is when that heat comes, when that the humidity with no rain, right? Where it's only 80 degrees, but it feels like 180 degrees out there, right? Because of the heat index. And everything just looks dry and parched and chapped and the whole thing. The momentum that our plants had in the spring dies away, right? Because there was momentum. Things were great. Things were growing. We were happy. And all of a sudden, stuff changes. It can actually go into drought mode. Right? Same thing spiritually. Our momentum, things are going well, and all of a sudden something hits us. There is heat, there is pressure, there is something, and we can actually allow ourselves to go into drought, and it kills our spiritual growth momentum that we had, right? That's the downside. That's the problem with summer. And I'll go ahead and admit that. This is also the time, on that last bullet point there, this is also the time that farmers and gardeners, and especially those of us amateur gardeners or whatever, we start looking for things to cut off, right? We need to prune. Sometimes we have this great plant and it looks good, but there are some little suckers, there are little feeders on there. They're like, okay, they're growing. It's not like they're dead. They're growing, but if I continue to allow that to grow, it will affect the entire plant, right? And so sometimes we have to cut off things that in any other situation could be good. If that was the whole thing, we would say, yeah, please grow. It's not the whole thing. It is actually a good thing that is draining life from the best thing. One writer years ago said, the enemy of best is not bad. The enemy of best is good. We get so wrapped up in good things, we forget the best things. And so that's where pruning comes in. Sometimes we have to cut off things to make sure that the plant that we want doesn't just survive the summer, but can actually thrive even in harsher conditions, or especially in harsher conditions. And that's what brings us to these next two steps of the path. Okay, we're actually going to do both of them together. We're not splitting up perseverance and godliness. We're going to do them together in this series because they're sort of like twin themes in the book of Hebrews. Okay, we'll see both of them woven in and out, interspersed throughout the book. Okay, and so we're going to look at them together. And we're going to spend the summer, while it's hot outside, we're going to spend the summer thinking about perseverance and godliness. Okay? In our spiritual development, we go through periods of heat, don't we? Intense heat, intense pressure, sometimes drought. Sometimes you don't read your Bible for a while, you don't pray for a while. You're like, I just really don't want to go to church because I feel like everyone's judging me, because if they look at me, I have it plastered on my face, you haven't read the Bible in a week or a month or a year or whatever. You didn't pray yesterday, and somehow God has etched that on your forehead and everyone's going to know, right? You've thought that before. I can't be the only one, right? You've thought that before. Everyone's going to judge you. Everyone's going to know. First of all, no one knows. It's you and God, first of all. Secondly, this is supposed to be a safe space where we can come together. This is where we can share prayer requests or we can grow, right? And it's supposed to be like that. It's not always like that, I know that, but that's the way it's supposed to be. And in our spiritual development, we go through periods like that, and in fact, sometimes we let ourselves get into a drought. Throughout the Bible, God uses illustrations, not just gardening, not just farming, but we will see that here in Hebrews, but also like potter and clay, right? There's also gems and stuff. Sometimes heat is exactly what's necessary to solidify and help us stay conformed to what it is that we're molding or shaping, right? Okay, one of my aunts did ceramics for years and years and years and years and years, right? And so we did ceramics with her, and you pour the stuff into the mold and you let it dry and everything, and that's when we painted it. And we had to be very careful when we were working with it, because it was, even though it was not like super wet, it hadn't been kiln dried yet, it hadn't been fired yet. And we could do damage to the detail, we could squish things or whatever. It wasn't until it was put into the fire, into the kiln, that the heat solidified the shape that it was put into, right? Okay? Sometimes, as we are working through excellence and knowledge and self-control, we're like, okay, I think I've got this. And God says, all right, let's throw you in the fire for a little bit and see if it sticks. Right? If knowledge is the classroom and self-control is the homework, perseverance is your exam. It's the test. Do you really know this? Have you actually learned this? Are you solid on this thing that you've been learning? Sometimes we need heat and pressure. How do you make diamonds, right? Heat and pressure, right? All of these things, we know this stuff instinctively, and yet somehow we think that we can go through this life without that stuff. Right? Hebrews chapter 5 is going to tell us that even Jesus, in his humanity, learned obedience through the things he suffered. What? Jesus had to suffer? Well, yeah, we know that. Jesus had to learn obedience? Yes. How did he learn obedience? Through the things he suffered. That's Hebrews chapter 5. Okay? And if God's goal is to make us like Jesus, why do we think that we would be exempt of going through things that Jesus went through? At least at some level, right? If he learned obedience through the things he suffered, maybe that's required for us as well. And I really think that that's why godliness follows perseverance in this list that we have from 2 Peter, right? Because learning the facts about something, knowledge, self-control, learning the facts about something doesn't bring the same change as living through it when that's all you have, right? The difference between what people call head knowledge and heart knowledge, right? You can know something, you can even do something out of obedience or out of duty or whatever, but when, use the expression, when the rubber meets the road, right? When things actually get tough, do we forget it, or has it actually become part of us? That's what perseverance and godliness is about, okay? It's one thing to know it, okay? And then the last thought, as we're thinking about the summer then, is also pruning. We find that we may need to cut some things out of our lives, some things that maybe were important, maybe were good early on, when we were younger, maybe when we were new Christians, this was really important, or this person was very helpful, but there may be times that we have to cut things, we have to cut people out of our lives because they are no longer helping us grow. In fact, they may actually be a deterrent. They may be hindering our growth at times, right? Like little suckers on our plants. And so there may need to be some pruning that happens. There's a saying that's been attributed to, I think, every sculptor out there ever. Nobody knows who actually started the saying, but you've heard the concept. It goes like this: how do you know how to create whatever it is you're creating? People attribute it to Michelangelo as he's creating David, or you have this big block of granite in front of you. How do you make an elephant out of it? And there is no one saying. It's been around for a couple of hundred years at least. And the concept is, well, I know that the elephant or David or whatever it is that you're trying to carve or sculpt is in it. I know it's in there, so I just keep chipping away everything that doesn't belong, right? I just keep chipping away everything that doesn't look like the end goal, the elephant or the David or the whatever, right? That's pruning. That's pruning. Sometimes, if our goal is to become like Jesus, sometimes that's not just adding, sometimes that's removing. Sometimes God needs to chip away, chisel away at things that don't belong because that doesn't help us look like Jesus. And we don't like that. Pruning is terrible. Pruning is painful. Pruning is hard. We don't like that, but sometimes that's exactly what's necessary. And so as we go through our seasons, as we go through the path, there is a time where we need to persevere because it's going to get hard, it's going to get dry. It may even, as you lay in bed at night, you may even quote David and Jesus when they were going through very difficult times and say, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's this great little verse tucked away in Hebrews chapter 13 that says, I will never leave you or forsake you. Just because it feels like it sometimes, just because we're in a summer drought, just because the heat index in our spiritual lives is super high and we think we're going to die, doesn't mean that God isn't there. Right? He said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And yet even Jesus said, why have you forsaken me? Did God ever abandon Jesus? Of course not. Of course not. And he's made us the promise that he never will either. And so we have to cling to that. So perseverance is when we choose to trust God in every test, temptation, and trial. Now, these have different sources. Tests come from God. Temptations come primarily from our own selves. Obviously, there's external sources as well, but James chapter 1 says that temptation really comes from our own heart. And trials come from all over this world around us. It can be fellow believers, Christians. It can be unbelievers. It could be Satan's world system. It could be whatever. But we are always in, let's say, danger. We are always in danger of running into a new faith test, a new temptation to sin, or a new trial where someone's just trying to knock us down. Just knock us down, right? When you go through the summer, when you go through the heat, when you go through the pressure, the step of perseverance is choosing to trust. You know, all that stuff that I've been learning, does it actually work in real life? Does it actually work in real life when I'm going through this stuff? Godliness, then, is when we work to align our character, our ethics, our worldview, even our personal thoughts, our thought methods, our thought patterns with Jesus himself. Because to be godly is a similar phrase to godlike. Godlike, not that we're going to become gods or anything, but godlikeness, right, is just shortened to godliness. Just a pronunciation thing. If we're going to be godly, godlike, if we're going to be conformed to the image of Jesus, then that means not just learning stuff in the Bible, not just obeying stuff, but going through the pressure, choosing to trust God, passing the test, and then working to make that a part of our nature. Part of our nature. Like this every time, okay, I know this works. I know this is what God expects. I know not just God expects it, but it does work. And I'm going to solidify that as a part of my nature. I don't want to make it sound like we have to do this alone, that God doesn't have any part of this. Of course he does. Okay, he's the one who's working in us to be able to do this. But Peter said, make every effort to add to your perseverance godliness. Not sit there and wait for God to make you godly. Right? This is not osmosis. This is not just happens to us because we were good one day or because we prayed for it. Make every effort to add to your perseverance. As you choose to trust, you also need to choose to align yourself. Align yourself. And that it takes prayer, it takes worship, it takes learning what God wants for us. And that's what brings us now. Long introduction today. I know that. That's okay. We're actually getting into the book of Hebrews next week. Okay? We're setting it up today. All right? That's what brings us to the book of Hebrews. I've already mentioned Hebrews a couple of times. You can see where some of these things are already in the book, right? That's what brings us here. Because I really think that next to Romans, Hebrews is one of the most theological books of the New Testament. There's a ton of theology in here. Okay, even though we're focusing on perseverance and godliness, there's a lot of knowledge that's going to go on for the next 16 weeks or so as we slowly work our way through this book of Hebrews. There's a lot of stuff that God simply wants us to know so that then we can obey it, persevere, and become godly in our loop. Here's the cool thing about Hebrews, okay? Just blanked out. Just think about this with me. Here's the cool thing about Hebrews. As you read through the New Testament, we are told over and over and over again that we should grow. Right? We have the path, we have all of these Romans, we have all of these things. We should grow. Galatians, walk in the Spirit, all of this stuff. 1 John, make sure that you live this way, love one another, all the things, right? All over the New Testament. We should grow, we should grow, we should grow. It even tells us how to grow, all the steps and all the everything, right? But what Hebrews does that the rest of the New Testament doesn't do to the same extent. There's a little bit in the rest of the New Testament. But what Hebrews does is it says you should grow. Here's how you grow. And it answers the big question, so what if I don't? So what if I don't? What if I don't grow? What if I say, you know what, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, that's good enough? What if I say, you know what, I started this growth process, but man, it just got so hard, there was all this pressure, and I just couldn't keep with it, so I give up. Obviously, this is not for me. What happens to me? What happens if, I know the Bible's, I should, but what happens if I don't? Hebrews answers that question in a way that the rest of the New Testament doesn't. It's one of the reasons that I love this book. Okay, I love what the writer says here. And I think it's important that we ask and answer that question because the Bible never actually says that growth is inevitable. The Bible never says that as long as you're saved, you'll just keep growing. God will just make you grow. God will make you persevere. You'll never fall away. You'll make sure that you have a great harvest for God, or you will bear fruit, or whatever some people say. It never says that. The Bible never says that. People say that, but the Bible never says that. The Bible never says that growth is inevitable. The Bible says we should grow. And the Bible says that we may not if we don't make every effort. And so what happens? What if we don't? What the writer is going to do is show us that there is a massive, dramatic loss for us if we choose to not grow, if we choose to not stay on the path, if we choose to just, I'm not saying, fall into some great big sin and scandal and everything. I'm just saying we just sit down. We just say, hey, there's a nice bench over there right off of the path. This is too hard. I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to sit down. The writer of Hebrews is going to say, if you do that, please let me warn you, if you do that, you will suffer a great loss. Now, that loss is not salvation. We cannot lose our salvation for any reason whatsoever. We cannot give it back. We cannot lose it. God does not take it back, okay, for any reason whatsoever. It's not our eternal salvation. But there is loss. And as we go through the book of Hebrews, if we choose to not persevere, if we choose to not add godliness, if we choose to just sit down or fall away or drift away or walk away or run away, maybe you know people who seem to be going really, really well in their spiritual life, and now they're running from God really, really hard. You're like, well, they can't possibly be saved. It's not what Hebrews says. It's not what Hebrews says. Okay? Just because there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus does not mean there is no punishment, does not mean that there is no loss. And that's what this book is for. And so it's fitting that I think it just really fits with perseverance and godliness well. Because this is the time where we need to make sure we remember it's not worth giving up. Because sometimes we go through periods in our lives where we just want to give up on Christianity, right? We don't want to give up on God, okay? We don't want to give up on God necessarily, but we want to give up on the rest of the stuff. So what happens if we do that? What happens if we don't grow? All right, let me show you the outline of the book, okay, because this will help us place things. This will help us see where the writer is going to go, how he's going to answer this question for us. Okay, basically there are 6 sections, 6 main sections with a warning in between each of the sections. 6 sections, 5 warnings. Okay? And he's going to build on the theme. I'll just tell you the theme of the whole book right now. Jesus is better than anything or anyone else. That's the whole thing. And he's going to be building on that, and that's some of the encouragement of don't give up, right? Don't give up. Jesus is better than anything or anyone else. You're not going to find anything better if you give up. So here's how he does that. In each one of the first 5 parts, he's going to focus on something specifically, first 4 parts, he's going to focus on something specifically about Jesus himself. How do I know that Jesus is better? Or how is Jesus better? The first part is in chapter 1. Jesus is better because he is a son. Jesus as the Son, S-O-N, is better. All right? And then the writer is going to break away to give a warning. And for just a couple of verses, the first warning is short. The first warning is actually sort of light, too. He just sort of eases us into it. The first warning, just a couple of verses at the beginning of chapter 2, there's warning number 1. Then he comes back for most of chapter 2 and a few verses in chapter 3 and talks about Jesus as a man, as a human. Why is that important? Because we're human, right? And so if Jesus can do this and we're supposed to be like Jesus, we can do it too, right? And so after that section, he gives another warning. And now this was a long one. This is the longest warning in the entire book. It takes most of chapter 3 and most of chapter 4. And this one sounds really harsh, but it's not the worst one. It gets worse. At the end of chapter 4 and most of the way through chapter 5, the writer says, hey, I want to talk to you about Jesus as our high priest. He is at the right hand of God right now. He is interceding on our behalf. Because of his qualifications, because he exceeded as a human, all of these things, he is a great high priest for us. And the writer starts to ramp up in chapter 5, and then he has to take a break in chapter 5, verse 11, and says, all right, I have a whole lot more to talk to you about this, but you need another warning. And from chapter 5, verse 11 to chapter 6, verse 12 is the most famous warning in all of the book of Hebrews. This is the one that most people know the best, if you know anything about it, okay? After he does that, he comes back and says, okay, let me pick up where I left off. So Jesus the high priest, part 1, Jesus the high priest, part 2, and now he gets into the longest part of the book, from the second half of chapter 6 all the way through the first 2/3 really of chapter 10. So all of chapters 7, 8, 9, part of 6, and most of 10. The writer is going to focus on Jesus as our high priest. And here we're going to find the word better over and over and over and over and over and over and over. He's better, he's better, he's better. He has this better promises, better covenant, better redemption, better. Why is that important? Because you can't find anyone or anything else that's better than Jesus. Jesus is better. That's the theme of the whole thing. And so the largest solid chunk with no warnings focuses on Jesus and his ministry right now and why he is so much better. Encouragement so that we don't fall away. Now, chapter 10, verse 26, through the end of the chapter, is the harshest warning in the whole book. This one is hard. This one is face-slapping. Okay? This one is so tough that even people who believe that you cannot lose your salvation for any reason start to question that because of this little section right here. They're reading these verses and you're like, okay, I know you say we can't lose our salvation. Are you sure? Because this right here sounds an awful lot like we can lose our salvation. It's tough. It's really hard. Okay? And we'll walk through it together. That's not what it says. It does not teach that. I'll show you what it means. Okay? We'll work through it together. All right? Part 5, after the fourth warning, part 5, then he gives us some encouragements to persevere. The best known section of Hebrews, as far as most people are concerned, is chapter 11, right? That great list of the great heroes of the faith. By faith, Abel. By faith, Enoch. By faith, Noah. By faith. Okay? Even people who've never read through Hebrews before, if you've been in church for any period of time, you probably know a little something about Hebrews chapter 11. Okay? That is a positive encouragement to persevere. See how they persevered? You can too. The first half of chapter 12 is the negative encouragement. You're like, I'm not sure there is such a thing as a negative encouragement. The negative side of the encouragement to persevere is, if you don't, there's discipline. Okay, so persevere. Don't give up. In the second half of chapter 12, he gives us our fifth and our final warning. And it's not quite as harsh as the fourth warning in chapter 10, but it's more destructive. He says, if you get to this point, if you have ignored warning number 1 and gotten to number 2, and if you've ignored number 2 and you've made it to number 3, and I'm warning you about number 3, and I'm slapping you around with number 4, number 5 may not sound as harsh, but it is far more. If you reach that point in your spiritual regression, you're no longer just hurting yourself and maybe some people around you. You're being destructive in your church, in your family, in the body of Christ. So don't get there. That's the second half of chapter 12. Okay? And then the book closes with some final instructions, some final encouragements, a great benediction. Man, I love the benediction at the end of Hebrews chapter 13. Just really, really cool. a lot of instructions. So, because all this is true, because of who Jesus is, and he's better than anything or anyone else, because of all these warnings, let's do these things. Don't fall away. Persevere, dig in, lock in, and don't fall away. Okay? So, if Jesus is better than anything or anyone else, let me warn you, that's why it's full in here. Let me warn you. All right. So, here's my challenge to you. Okay, a couple more thoughts before we wrap up this morning, but just coming out of this, here's my challenge to you. Dig in, lock in. I know this is a little bit longer series than we've been doing this year. Most of our series been, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. This is a long one. Okay, Hebrews has 13 chapters. We're going to take our time and go through these. All right, this is going to take about 4 months to get through this. All right. Pay attention, lock in, ask questions, stick around for second hour if at all possible, engage with this, okay? Meditate on this, allow yourself to be convicted if conviction is necessary. Don't push it off. Don't just say, hey, listen, that sounded really tough and I probably need that. I'm definitely skipping second hour today, that type of thing, okay? That's not how we grow. 2 Peter chapter 1, make every effort. If we really want to grow, we have to put the effort in. And I'm telling you right now, unless you are already perfect, there will be parts of this book that will challenge and convict you. We're stepping on toes here. And you'll probably hear me say this several times, at least one for each warning passage. Don't shoot the messenger. Okay? I'm just telling you what the text says. Okay? And we're going to work through it together because we want to grow. Gary and I want you to grow from a church perspective, and I think you want to grow on an individual level. Okay? And so this is really going to help us as we try to weather the summer, weather the drought. Maybe you're in one right now, and this is perfect. Maybe you're not in one. Maybe you're past the drought. You just came out of it. Maybe you're still in the winter or the spring season in part of your life, and you're still growing. I'm telling you, there's summer coming, and you're going to need this. Wherever you are in your spiritual life, you need to know this. So I'm really challenging you to dig into this. Not that the other series aren't good, but this one is where, like I said, the rubber meets the road, right? This is the one that separates the men from the boys. Okay, if I can use that phrase, right? This is really the one that brings this out. Now, that's the warning stuff. I don't want to focus too much on the warnings. There are a lot of encouragements in here. Lots and lots of encouragements. There's some really good stuff in here. There are verses that you are going to want to memorize in here and sink them down into your heart and your mind so that you can remember them during the summer season, right? There are a lot of encouragements in here. In fact, every single one of these warnings is followed immediately, and sometimes even preceded by, but followed immediately by an encouragement. So he slaps us around a little bit with a warning and then gives us an encouragement, okay, to help ease it a little bit. Not that this is not important, but, okay, I know that was hard, so let me encourage you. One of my favorites is the third warning, which most people know better than the rest of them. After that, he says, but I pray of better things for you. I pray of better things for you. Because I know this is possible, but I know it's not necessary. You don't have to go through this warning. I'm sure of better things for you. Okay? And I think those are some really great encouragements. Let me share with you one of, because we're just setting this up right now. I know this is, I don't know if it seems scattered. It's not meant to be scattered. I'm just trying to set this up. We'll actually get into the book next week, okay? But one of my favorite quotes, not from Hebrews, but about Hebrews, okay? One of my favorite quotes that helps us see this whole idea of encouragement, it explains or describes this amazing book. A guy by the name of Gordon Olson wrote, "Far from undermining the eternal security of the true believer," okay, making us think that we can lose our salvation. "This epistle is freighted with many words, expressions, and concepts which affirm this truth in no uncertain terms, as well as to encourage all to personally enter into its full reality." The great irony of the misinterpretation of Hebrews is that this book has more words like confidence or boldness, and I put on there the number of times these show up, assurance, confirmation, access, promises, hope, watch this, than any other Bible book. How cool is that? People come to Hebrews and think, oh, I'm going to lose my salvation. And Olson says, no, if you look at this, this actually has better confidence and better assurance than any other Bible book. That's pretty cool, huh? The author not only spoke of Christ's eternal redemption, chapter 9, eternal salvation, chapter 5, eternal inheritance, also chapter 9, but furthermore, that he saves us forever, one of my favorite verses in Hebrews, chapter 7, verse 25, and that we are perfected for all time, chapter 10, verse 4. In sum, here's Olson's summary. In sum, Christ was sacrificed once for all that we may be saved once for all. With a whole bunch of references in there. Isn't that great? Okay? As we approach this book, this is, yes, there are warnings in there. Yes, there are things that are going to convict you and challenge you and make you think, oh, maybe I'm not even saved. Don't go there. Don't go there. Okay? Unless the Holy Spirit's leading you there, I guess. But don't let the book just do that. Okay? Because the thing is, there are people who say that the warnings are too harsh. These warnings are too harsh. They can't possibly be written to believers. They must be written to unbelievers or people who just claim to be Christians but aren't really Christians. It's not true. The writer includes himself. If we do this, there is loss. And I don't think any of us are going to wonder if the writer of Hebrews was a believer or not. Okay. I'm not sure. Maybe he wrote the Bible but wasn't actually a Christian. I don't think we even have to worry about that. But the writer of Hebrews repeatedly says, if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, if anyone does this, then we're in danger of this great loss. Okay? So, is it possible that these warnings can be helpful for people who are not truly believers? Yes. Yes, they can say, hey, be careful, but the thing is that the New Testament gives one command for an unbeliever, just one. That's believe, right? Just believe. Not do a bunch of stuff, not be better, not walk the path. You can't get on the path if you don't go through faith, right? Just believe. Not a single time in the book of Hebrews does the writer tell the readers to believe in Jesus. Not once. The writer always assumed they were saved. Always assumed they were saved. Okay? And because of that, he says, don't fall away. You can't fall away from something you're not in. Don't walk away. You can't walk away from something that you're not there. Okay? Grow what you have. You can't grow if you have nothing. Right? Everything in this book assumes that the readers were believers. And we'll talk about that a little more next week as we get into the book. Everything assumes that they were readers, or that they were readers were believers. There we go. Everything assumes that they were believers. Okay? So if you know Jesus as your Savior, you're going to be really excited about the encouragements, not so much about the warnings, but they're for you too. They're for you too. Okay? So, the book really is still very relevant. Let me I'm going to skip one here. We'll come back next time. Why is Hebrews still relevant and practical? Here's where we'll wrap up today, and then we'll get into this next time. Okay, we'll actually start seeing this. Number one, just what I said, the writer never questioned the salvation of his readers. He always assumed they were believers. Okay? And how he addresses them as brothers and sisters, participants with Christ, all sorts of things. Enlightened, these are all terms for believers. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, why is it still relevant and practical? The readers were not satisfied with just a spiritual Christianity. And here's what I mean by that. These were Jewish believers. You say, well, I'm not a Jewish believer. Fine, there are still a lot of principles that are applicable for us. Here's one of the things. They were not satisfied with just a spiritual Christianity. Okay? They grew up going to synagogue and going to Jerusalem multiple times a year because they were not in Jerusalem. We'll talk about that next week or in the next couple of weeks. They had the sacrifices, they had the incense, they had all the stuff, right? And then they came to faith in Jesus as Savior, and they didn't need the stuff anymore. But they were used to the stuff. And they think, well, maybe if I still keep doing this, I'll be more holy. I'll grow better. My Christianity will be better if I add these things back in. The writer says it's not true. But people do this all the time today. I'm going to do rituals. I'm going to add, pictures. I'm going to add specific prayers or books or whatever. There are people that are getting into mysticism and adding things from ancient mystics and even pagan cults and religions, thinking that if they do one more thing, they will have a stronger faith. And the writer of Hebrews says it's not true. It's not true. In fact, it can actually take you away from your Christianity. Christianity is a spiritual thing. Just because we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't, smell it, like every other religion out there has stuff. We don't need stuff. We have Jesus, because Jesus is better than anything and anyone else. Okay? Number three, they were tempted to hide their faith when it became inconvenient. And I'll show you this. They were living, the book of Hebrews was written during Nero's persecution of the Christians. Emperor Nero was persecuting Christians. The writer says that some of them have already had their possessions taken. Some of them were in prison, but they hadn't died yet. So we can sort of place this book because they hadn't gotten to the point where Nero was killing them yet. He was just taking their stuff and throwing them in prison. So the mid-60s, probably 64, 65, when Nero was persecuting Christians. And what they thought was, hey, we're still Jews. We could just hide our faith in Jesus. We could go back to the synagogue. We could go back to the old way of living, the old way of doing things, and we can hide the fact that we're Christians until persecution is over, then we can sort of come back out. They were going to hide their faith when their faith was inconvenient. When the summer was too hot, when the things were too hard, when the pressure was on, like, well, I just won't act like a Christian, talk like a Christian. I just will pretend that I'm not a Christian until the persecution is over. Then I will come back out. And the writer says, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. There will be loss. And again, as we go through this, I can show you there will be great, great loss. That's why the letter exists. And that's what the writer is going to address in these things. So, buckle up. Buckle up. This is going to be, whoever the writer is, we'll talk about that too. He's going to take us on a ride. He's going to take us on a ride, but it's going to be good. Really, really good. So dig in. Dig in. I promise that if you stick with this, you'll be stronger at the end of this series than when you came into it. Here's how the writer opens the book, and we'll close this way this morning. After God spoke long ago in various portions and in various ways to our ancestors through the prophets, in these last days, he has spoken to us in a Son. Because he's better. He's better than anything. So, Jesus is better than anything and anyone else. Hebrews says, chase the Son. Chase the Son.